you've had one hell of a life. And I think it's inspiring to a lot of people. You've gone through a lot of painful low points, including meth addiction, loss. And like you mentioned, you've come out of that to become a successful programmer and a person that inspires a huge number of people to get into programming and just to find success in life. So maybe I would love it if you laid out just your whole life journey from the beginning.
So I guess if we're going to start with this whole journey, I think it's probably best to start when I was about 4 or 5 years old. That was the first time I was ever exposed to pornography. And it's kind of just earwormed me for a large portion of my life. And so I don't think there was a day that didn't go by from when I was a very young lad all the way up until I was 20 some years old where I didn't think about porn on the daily basis. And so it's just like every single day, even at that young. And so it's just a very mind-consuming, time-consuming, thought-consuming thing that kind of plagued me from starting at a very young age. When I was 7 years old, my dad died. That was kind of a really tough period of life. I still think about this time that I went over to China, and there's kind of some rules that we were given, and one of the rules was just like, hey, don't talk about God, and if you do, use the word dad instead. And I was just like, okay, dad. It was like the first time I said that word in like 17 years or some amount of time. Like, dad. It was like so weird to say that phrase. And I was just like, oh, that was just the strangest thing I've ever said in my entire lifetime. Yeah. It just felt so weird. So kind of rewind. As I got older, obviously, was very good at computers, good at accessing porn, of course. Played video games on the internet. Fun kind of like side quest story. I think the guy's name is Lord Talk on Twitch. I can't quite remember his name, but he built this game called Grail, Graal, and Grail Online. And when I was a young lad, that it was just like Zelda, except for it also had a level editor and it had like a C-like language. And that's how I discovered how to program, is I looked at these symbols and figured out what they meant. And then I was able to make things happen in the game. And that was that's my introduction into programming. So thank you, that guy, whatever your Twitch name was. But all right, so keep on going. As I got older, I was super bad socially. I was not a very great social person. High school was brutal, got made fun of a lot. Really didn't enjoy, I wouldn't say I had a great time during high school. Definitely felt very out of place or offset or maybe misplaced, if you will. I'm not sure what the right word is. And so, of course, at that point, I just always wanted to be accepted, to fit in and all that. I did forget to say one side story. After my dad died, my older brother, he started getting into drugs. And along with that, he exposed me to pot. So at 8 years old, I was smoking some marijuana for a while there until like maybe 11 or 12 and took a break. And then again, did a lot of that as I got a little bit older, but so I kind of got a lot of these exposures fairly young. 16, 15 through 18, a lot of drinking and all that. When I graduated, or as I was graduating high school, it's just like I had such sadness, if you will. I was very sad about how everything went. Tried to commit suicide. Obviously, it was a very poor attempt, and I'm still here today. I'm very happy about that aspect. I'm glad that I didn't follow through with anything. Had to go to the hospital and all that. And when I was done, I just still remember kind of coming out of the hospital, and at like that moment, it's kind of like something broke in you. Have you ever read the book Wheel of Time? It's 14,000 pages or something like that. But right around page 12,000, Rand has to intentionally kill a girl, the main character. And that's like the moment he breaks and he gets into like hard Rand. Quindalar Rand, if you will. For those that know Wheel of Time will appreciate all that. For those that don't, it's very confusing, and I understand. Not the Amazon movie show, not that Wheel of Time. So now that we kind of go back onto it, at that point, it's just like something kind of broke in me. And it's just like I just didn't care anymore. So all the kind of social awkwardness, if you will, all that kind of just died away with me, but also so did everything else. And so I started using a bunch of drugs, LSD, mushrooms, meth, did a bunch of that stuff, and then went off to college and continued to do a bunch of stuff. I took too much acid to where for like quite a few years I had like little squigglies on the side of my eyes whenever I'd walk by high contrast objects. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like that whole period of life was just kind of marked by just poor decisions. And then sometime when I was about 19 years old, somewhere in that range, I just had this one evening where it's just I felt the very dramatic and real presence of God. And it's just like I kind of had this choice, like Frodo on a razor, where it's like, if I go either way, I'm going to fall off and I need to change my life. You get to make the choice now. Do you want to do that or not? And so I remember going, okay, I do want to change my life. Like, I don't like this experience. I don't like what I'm living. I am still very sad. I still feel very desperate. I still feel all those things. I'm just like pretending to be this other person. And then I just went to sleep that night. Nothing changed in my life. Everything was still the way it was. I woke up the next day, the same person. And I was just like, oh, that's just like such a strange, weird kind of experience. And I just went about my day. And then I remember, I think that evening I looked at porn and all of a sudden I just had a conscious. I just like this deep, profound like shame. And I was like, I've never felt shame in my life. Right? Like I have no idea what's happening now. And then all of a sudden when I smoked pot, I just felt deep shame. And when I hurt somebody or did something wrong, also it's just like I got a conscious from that evening. That's what kind of my gift was, if you will. And it's just like at that point, I didn't even have a choice. I had to change my life because for whatever reason, I've kind of been changed in a moment. And so from there, I started actually trying in school. I always kind of joke around that I got 2.14 in high school. I had a teacher handwrite me a note saying I was the worst student she's ever had, all that kind of stuff. I was not a really great student. And then in that moment, it's just like, okay, now life's changed and I start trying to learn. I try to become a good student. And it turns out it's really hard. Like I was really bad. I still got C's. I went and took pre-calculus and failed pre-calculus. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I used to be the smart math guy. And now I'm kind of the idiot failing. And so it's like, I'm just questioning myself and all that. And I spend hours upon hours in like a studying math learning center. And then just at some point, years into this journey, I'm like a year and a half into this journey at this point, it's just like something clicks. And I go from being the worst person to just immediately becoming the best. Everything after that is just, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, I was the best person at math. I started going into my computer science classes. I just really got everything. It's just like everything at just years after trying just all of a sudden became easier. And I'm not sure if it happened over the course of weeks or when the easier started, but it was just first predicated by just a huge amount of difficulty. And then this is kind of where I started really desiring and loving the process of learning, was when things started getting easier after all those years, because I just was motivated by this desire to do something, not thinking it was going to get any easier. And then all of a sudden it just started getting easier and it was great. And that's kind of really where I guess I started having the biggest parts of my life change. At that point, I started really, really, really wanting to never look at porn again, because every single time just such shame and I really wanted to stop. And that was by far the hardest addiction to quit. Like smoking cigarettes was also a really hard addiction to quit. Shockingly hard addiction to quit. But porn by far was just the worst of them all. And then I think about 22, I was finally done with all kind of addictions, if you will. And then for a year, I just worked in all that. And I think right around maybe it's 21 and 3/4, somewhere in that range. I'm not really sure where I stopped all the addictions part, or at least the outwardly addictions. And then at some point, 6 months later, a year later, met my beautiful wife. Things just started falling more and more into place. I loved more and more work. I loved programming. I started programming like 12 hours a day. I watched the Social Network movie. And after that, I was just like, I'm doing a startup. And so like that night, I started my first startup and I was just like, it was in PHP, by the way.
Nice.
PHP, yeah, 5.2 or something like that. It was great times. And I was just so motivated to do that. And I would just sometimes I'd program for 24, 36 hours straight. And I just like, nonstop. Just that's all I wanted to do at all points. I think my wife got a little sick of me. She would be like, can you drop me off at school? And I'd be like, no, I'm programming. I was not a very nice, I didn't think through things that well. Yeah. And I was just so into it and I just did it nonstop. And that's kind of like how I became me.